What's going on, everybody? I'm your host, Grayson off, and Trent. You could say hi, Trent.
Yeah, hey, what's up, guys?
We're here for the 5th episode of Cosmic Complexity, and today we're going to be talking about multiple dimensions, multiple worlds. I'm actually very excited about this episode. We've been kind of talking about different subjects the past couple of go-rounds, and we just now are going into the more in-depth on the different subjects that we've talked about before. But I don't know, Trent, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah,
It's been a good day.
We've been having some good time. We just finished
yeah.
watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. We watched the episode with the poker guy. I was showing Trent that episode because it's one of my favorite episodes. It has nothing to do with multiple dimensions or anything, but I thought it was a great episode.
Yeah, I need to get into that show. Seems like a pretty good show. So
I mean, I think it's a solid, solid 4 out of something. But
yeah,
maybe 4 out of 5. That's
stars?
4 out of 5 stars for the whole show itself. But I guess we could just kind of go right into it. This episode is kind of a loose subject. We were kind of going back and forth before we started recording because we were like, are we talking about multiple dimensions? Are we talking about multiple worlds?
Yeah.
I mean,
multiverse.
There's a lot of layers to it. I think loosely, just to kind of lay the ground of the conversation before we get into it, I would say multiple worlds are like, so if we say multi-worlds, like I feel like I'm talking about in the same universe, if here, or like in the same galaxies, and of course it's ever expanding and it's infinitely moving, and so if I say world, other worlds, I'm referring to like worlds besides Earth that are inhabiting people. I think that's an interesting conversation we can have. Multiple dimensions. We're talking about like what were you saying? There's 3.
Yeah. I mean, when we were kind of talking about it before, but I brought up like obviously we exist in 3 dimensions, and I believe that they have proven that like there's a 4th dimension that we know for sure, and I should have researched that more, but
no, that's fine.
But I think that a lot of like physicists and scientists believe that there are other dimensions that exist beyond our 3 dimensions. But
so we talk about a dimension we're talking about besides the 3 that we can understand.
Yeah, like length, width, height.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Or you got like a line, and you got like a square, or you got a cube.
Okay. And then multiple dimensions, like, so I think it was episode 4, the last episode, we were kind of talking about different things, and one of the questions that came up while we were in that conversation was God being a interdimensional being and what that would kind of look like, and trying to wrap our brains around what that looks like. So we got a couple of things to talk about this go around, and I'm excited. I think it's gonna be some fun conversations. I mean, I'm down to start with just we've established before, we're both Christians. So God, under our understanding and belief, at least speaking for myself, I'm not sure, but he is all sovereign. He is moving and breathing through all things, is living through all things, and at least I believe like he is in control of all things.
Yeah.
So do you think under that umbrella that God is and will be, is constantly sovereign, sovereignty, under that sovereignty, do you think that God is a multi-dimensional being?
I mean, I think that I mean, whatever exists like now, I mean, God is God transcends it completely. Like, so I mean, you can think of the most far out galaxy, or the most mind-boggling, multi-dimensional thing you can think of, and God would still transcend that. So I think that it's not even a fair comparison to say that he's multi-dimensional. I think that he would transcend any kind of dimensions that we could possibly imagine.
Yeah. So he'd be beyond multi-dimensions.
Which is not to say that he's less than a a multidimensional being, but I would say that he's more than that. You know, he transcends
Yeah.
any kind of like thing that we could compare him to.
It's
you know?
kind of like it's kind of an infinite loop of, you know, what ifs. You know, it's like that stupid question of can God make can God make a rock too big to pick up himself?
Yeah. That's kind of it's kind of a dumb question, but it's also like
it makes you kind of
you really can't answer it, you know.
Which I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can hear that, but my cat she's picked up her monkey and she's screaming in the room over. But if you hear any noises that sound like a small child screaming, it's not a child. It is a cat.
It's a cat.
I don't know if you could pick it up. No, it's not picking it up. We're watching the volume right now. Yeah, you can't hear it. I wish you could. It's like funny. It's pretty powerful. Anyways.
All right, where were we?
Can God make a rock too big for himself to pick up? Which, I mean, what would be your answer for that? And I'll tell you my answer to that question. Because I feel like that's one we should at least answer. We brought it up. Do you think God can?
I feel like you can't even answer that because, like, either way, you'd be saying something that God can't do. But now this is kind of different, but it kind of relates to this. I have thought about this before, you know, because you always think like, oh, well, God can do anything, like he can do anything he wants.
Yeah.
But I mean, not necessarily. You know, like God can't sin; it's against his nature. You know, he can't.
You keep going. I gotta get this monkey away from me.
Yeah. So I just feel like, yeah, I don't necessarily think it's wrong to say that God can't do something, like, or it's not in his nature to do something. Obviously, like we established, God is all sovereign, all powerful. There's nothing. This is contradicting what I just said, but there's nothing that he can't do that is within his nature, you know, which is holiness. So all that to say, I don't think it's, you know, but
it's a loaded hypothetical.
Yeah, it's like either way, you're saying that God it's something that's out of God's power, you know, like, because if you say he can't make a rock, then you're saying it's out of his power to make that rock.
Yeah.
Or you say he can't lift it.
So my answer would be he can, but why would he? Like, there's no point of him to do that.
Yeah.
Like, in the same way that God could smite the entire earth right now if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But it's also like, why would he do that? You know, like, why would God smite? Why would he do that?
Yeah. No, yeah. And honestly, another interesting thing to think about is, like, if we, like we established, or, well, I guess, like, kind of my thought on it is that God transcends any dimension that could possibly exist, if more than 4 dimensions exist. God transcends it. So is, like, in our minds, we think, oh, well, you can't, an all-powerful being can't create a rock too big that he can't lift. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in our minds, like, that we can't make that work. But who's to say, like, God can't? Yeah, exactly. Because, like, if he transcends, like, everything, then who's to say that he can't do that? You know what I mean? It's kind of like,
that's why I say he could. Like,
I don't know if we'll ever talk about like the Trinity on this podcast, but, like, it's kind of like the Trinity. You know, like, you can't really
fully understand the concept of it.
Yeah.
I bet we can add it to the episode.
Yeah.
I swear. There's no set ending to this podcast, so I'm sure we will. I feel like I understand the Trinity, but I feel like I'm not on a level enough of understanding to, like, sit down and talk about it for an hour. Like, I'm not.
I mean,
I have a lot of books that I'm reading right now, but even then, it's a hard concept. So.
I feel like I could talk about it for an hour, but I still don't understand it. You know, it's like, I don't think I ever will. But
I did talk to Will, and he said he would love to be on this podcast. So we might hold that topic for him because he would have a ball with it. But
definitely.
Yeah, I think in order for that, the question of, like, is he a multi-dimensional being?
Mm-hmm.
I think in order for that to be a question worth answering is if we believe in multiple dimensions in the first place.
Yeah.
And also, I think relevance is an important factor in that. It's like, what's the point of even talking about this? I think it's a silly concept, but it also gets your brain kind of working and trying to understand it. But I think there are multiple dimensions, at least to an extent, like that we can understand. And I do think God transcends those things. Like, there's definitely in dimensions is a loose term, but like God is able to speak with us and interact with us in ways that are more than physical. Like, I feel like that's an interesting kind of way of looking at it. Like, God is spiritual.
Yeah.
God, there's a spiritual dimension, if we understand it in that sense. Like, I feel like he is able to communicate with us through that, or even just through physical things.
Yeah.
Like, I think there are some things that happen in your lifetime, whether over time or like actual things happening in front of you, where it's like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I've had multiple times where I've almost been like killed, and I was like, if this was just slightly over, I would have been dead. And it's like, okay, like that's pretty. I think that's a pretty clear sign of like God and his hand kind of working in that way. Yeah. Like when my house flooded, Ranger was on a table, so she was above the water. That was electrified.
Oh gosh, that's crazy.
Like, yeah, and also like Grant didn't get electrocuted. And
yeah, because he like stepped in the water.
He did before he even realized it was flooding. And like, if any of those wires were exposed, or like if there were any junction boxes or anything that would have been like in the water, he would have been dead. Like it would have been, because they didn't turn the power off. He still had the lights on and everything. Like I like told him to shut the power off. It was the first thing I said. Was like, do not step in the water. He's like, already did it. And I was like, you idiot.
Yeah.
But like even that,
He's
like,
okay,
yeah. And that's, I think it's a blessing, and that's, the physical aspect of God interacting.
Yeah.
So I say, like, based on the knowledge that we have with our tiny little human brains, I would say God is an interdimensional being. But then that kind of brings like, okay, well, if there's multiple worlds, like not in space, but in like dimensions, like multi-world dimensions, like
multiverses.
There's a universe or a different world dimension where I picked up this cup and I put it down, and there's one where I didn't do that, and there's one where I picked it up and it exploded, and there's one where, which I mean, I think that's I can't gather the concept of it, but there's like a idea that if you can think of a world, it's happening. Like, that's the idea of it. Like, there's a multiversal world or whatever, where we're both sitting down and recording a podcast called Cosmic Croissants, and we just talk about croissants, and that's it. We don't talk about anything else. We talk about like chocolate croissants and cinnamon.
This kind of sounds like a good podcast. Can we make this a?
It's already happened.
I guess you're right. We happening somewhere.
We can run that real quick. We'll here. I'll start.
Do you think we could like do an interdimensional like mic thing, and then have just the other versions of us? On the podcast?
Here, just real quick, I want you guys to shut your ears and just imagine a podcast called Cosmic Croissants. All right. What's up, guys? I'm your host, Grayson, and I'd like to welcome you to Cosmic Croissants. I'm here with Trenton Messer, and we're going to be talking about one of the best croissants we've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
I have it right in front of me here on this plate, and it's delicious. It's one of the best I've ever seen, actually. God, look at its crust.
Look at that. Look at the layers.
Oh, we got this from Belmore Bakery out on Western Street, and it's still steaming, man. We just pulled it out of this.
Yeah.
Oh, look at it, Trent. Oh man.
Can we just turn off the podcast and eat this croissant?
This is the whole point of this podcast, man. We gotta talk about it. We gotta try this out.
I guess so.
All right. Well, let me rip it open real quick.
That was good.
No. What? We haven't even had it yet. Hold on. Let me open it up.
Oh yeah, we're committing.
You can rule one of committing what's the word? Improv.
Oh yes, yes. Cool.
I went to improv class, so I know what I'm talking about here. But let me get the back. Lock in.
All right, I'm looking.
All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Look at this croissant.
Man, it's got the chocolate and stuff in there.
Look at it.
It's a nice croissant.
Here, take a bite.
All right,
take a bite. Hot. Oh yeah, crunchy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let me have a bite.
Nice crisp.
Oh wow!
I think you got some of the chocolate. That was a
little chocolate on my lip. Here, wipe it up.
All right.
Thank you. Here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Trent licks his thumb lustfully. Anyways, that's what cosmic croissants will be.
Yeah.
We'll put a poll up on the video if you wanna see that for real.
Yeah.
We'll make that happen. So for the launch of Cosmic Complexity, we're gonna have the video where we go into Paladero Canyon and try to find Bigfoot. Mm-hmm. Was that Bigfoot, or are we trying to skinwalkers?
Honestly, any sort of.
We're just gonna go and try to find somebody, and we're also going to have an episode of Cosmic Croissants out as well. So be looking out for that, which never will happen. But basically, the idea is, if you can think of it, it happens.
Yeah,
like there's a dimension out there, or a world, or whatever. I feel like we're jumping around the word for that. Like the correct use, is it multiverse?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that. I mean, I guess all the MCU and DCU movies have kind of popularized that word. But I feel like that's the accurate word for it.
Which I also think they kind of dumb it down too. Like I feel like there's more complexity to it. Get it? But more so in the idea of like the simplicity of it. Like it can be very like in one place I'm left-handed, in one place I'm right-handed.
Yeah.
Or like in one place I lost one of my toes. Or I was never here. Like it's kind of a silly idea, I personally think. Like I don't really think I think it's kind of a stupid theory to have and believe. Yeah. Now, that is my own personal opinion, and like I'm not knocking anybody who thinks that. But for me, like, if I'm gonna think about another world, why does that matter? Like, unless we're able to tap into those worlds, like, why should I care? You know, which maybe someone has. Maybe there is a ability to go into multiple worlds. But even if you did have that, like, what's the point of that?
Yeah,
and it's just like, well, okay, I mean, like, that's cool, I guess. It's like watching TV.
Yeah, like you can just see a different version of yourself.
It's like going into Disney World and not being able to do anything. You're just kind of there.
Yeah,
like it's not cool. All right.
I mean, I kind of see the like thought process behind it. Like, oh well, what if I, went to Cane's instead of Chick-fil-A, or what if I did? I see like the thought and like how like the butterfly effect and how one choice can change all this crazy stuff. But I feel like if we're like coming from our worldview as like Christians, and like we both established that we like believe in God's sovereignty and He's all powerful and orchestrates history. So I think coming from that worldview, I just don't see any way that I can that I can reconcile a multiverse with that, because if God is ultimately orchestrating history, then like there is no other dimension where we did A instead of B or whatever, so
I don't think it's, I think it's too like I feel like it is against what we believe to think that, or even need to think that. Like I think it's pretty easy to get caught up in that like what if kind of idea and mindset of like, okay, but what if I did this differently? What if I said this to this person and now they're like still my best friend? They're still here forever, and they're still like, or what if I kissed this girl at this time, or confessed my feelings for her, and then they kind of get in this like mindset that this world isn't as good as it could have been, and they're they kind of start to look at everything with this weird melancholy, like I don't like it here, and I wish I was in another dimension. It's like when Taylor Swift said she wished she was in the 1930s, but without the racism. You know,
Mhm.
it's a stupid statement.
Yeah, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Which that's the point. I get it. Okay, I know. I know it's not supposed to be taken seriously. I'm just making a pop culture reference that is currently 4 months late. Um, but
Yeah,
in April that was a pretty current little pop culture moment there.
yeah, it's good reference.
Who knows what we're going to be doing in July?
Oh my
Well, the
gosh,
world might be on
the way
fire.
things are going, who knows?
We don't even know.
But
Yeah, but
yeah,
I think as Christians, I think it's fair to be like, absolutely. I don't think multiple dimensions exist or multiple worlds. At
yeah,
least I don't think there's a point for that. Um, I think that God is very clearly oriented and orchestrated everything in our
yeah,
world, and there's no
definitely.
need to fear that or think that there'd be something missed.
No,
And I think especially if you look back in your life and you look at how perfectly everything has worked out, even in the bad things, like you can still see that hand of just perfectly orchestrating everything for
yeah,
you.
for sure.
And you know, just your decisions that you make and how they affect you and how the people around you affect you and how when you need someone the most they're there for
Mhm.
you. I think that you know it's very clear that God's sovereignty is taking care of us even amidst, you know, the different awful things that have happened.
Yeah,
Like take 9/11 for example, an awful thing.
mhm.
But since 9/11, airport security is like peak. Like
Yeah,
there is no if, ands, or buts. Like
yeah,
we are very important. Like we make sure that everything is secure.
yeah,
Like people who are in airports, if there's any sign of aggression or like they will be kicked off the airplane. Like I think that that is a very clear like if it hadn't have happened, we wouldn't have learned from
yeah.
that.
And
And
actually, a really now that you bring that up, like a cool example of that, like in the Bible, would be the story of Joseph and his brothers. I don't know if, I mean, I know you're familiar with it, but if you're
mhm,
not familiar with it, basically, um, Joseph was the youngest of 12 brothers, and their father favored Joseph the most, and he gave him a coat of many colors, all this kind of stuff. And so his brothers kind of resented him, and so they basically sold him into slavery, and he kind of grew into Egypt. But it basically through God's uh, God's hand and His sovereignty, Joseph ended up in a very powerful position in Egypt, and he was in control of like all the food and all that kind of stuff. And There's this big famine that came over the land, and and Joseph was able to help his people and like the air, like the land through the famine. But anyways, in Genesis 50, there's a verse where Joseph's brothers are like kind of falling on their faces and like saying, "Please don't kill us," basically for what we did to you. And Joseph was like, it's not, it wasn't in my hands, and the verse that really sticks out to me is Joseph says, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." So I think that's a cool, like,
mhm.
people can have their evil intentions and evil plans, but ultimately they can't thwart the like God's plan, which is for good. So
Right. Yeah, I think episode 2 I used that as an example.
really,
It talked about sin. Yeah. Um,
hmm,
I'm not knocking that you went back and retold it. I think it's
mhm,
important, especially if you mention a story to tell the story
yeah,
full. Um, but yeah, like I think that there is an argument to be made, even when it is something awful, that it is in the end used for the good.
yeah,
Even if we don't see it at the time, even if it's like it doesn't knock the fact that that is a horrible event. Like no Christian is saying, "Well, God used it for good, so it's a good event." No, that's not what we're saying at all. We're saying that despite the evil of this world and
yeah,
despite the broken, sinful humanity is, God still uses that for His glory and for His good.
yeah,
And I think that is something that only a sovereign God can do.
yeah. And I
But
think it's also something that should like comfort us and not, because obviously the easy thing to do would be like, oh, well, are you saying that God allowed this horrible thing to happen? I mean, I don't think that we should necessarily view it in that way. We should view it in the way that like the world is broken, and it's not God's fault the world's broken.
yeah,
And so we should see it as like, take comfort in the fact that God is working all things together for for His glory and for good ultimately. So,
And I've also heard like people who are in that argument of like, well, God allowed this to happen. It's like, sure, I guess, but what do you define as allowed? Like, does God allow you to live and be here?
yeah,
So are you saying God allowing this event to happen, how dare he? But he also allows you to live, and you're sinful, you're broken, and he still allows you to make those decisions.
Yeah.
He still allows you to live in the first place.
Yep.
When he could very easily just have not.
Yeah.
None of us could have happened. We couldn't have been sitting in this chair talking about, just this weird cosmic complexity thing. This is being allowed by God right now.
Yeah.
He allows everything to happen by grace. And I think it's a silly argument to be like, how could God allow this to happen? It's like, how could he allow you to be here right now? Like,
Yeah.
how dare you ask that question? Like, who are you to accuse?
Yep.
It's just silly
Yeah.
to me. It's a silly.
Like, you're the created being. You're not. Like we mentioned, like, God is transcendent. He transcends all things, and like, there's no way we could possibly understand His mind or His intent. Like, well, I mean, obviously His intentions we can understand, but we can't fully understand the depths of His knowledge. So, like, who are we to speak back?
Yeah. Which a lot of people relate that to like a child and their father.
Yeah.
And then, like, you created this child. You're raising this child. You're helping this child. You've given it guidelines and boundaries, and don't do this. Don't put your hand on the hot plate. And it's like the kid putting their hand on the hot plate.
Yeah.
And being in pain and saying, why would you allow me to do that?
Yeah.
It's like, no, you did that. That was you. I didn't.
Yeah.
I allowed you, I guess. I didn't stop you.
Yeah.
What did you want me to do? Do you want God to just appear and just like? But
yeah.
So I don't think. Where were we? God, dimensions.
Yeah.
We kind of went on a rabbit hole there.
I think it was a good rabbit hole though to go on.
It's an interesting one to think about. I think it's not addressed enough by Christians too.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that question is avoided by many, and it's never really answered. And I think the biggest response to that question is don't doubt God, or don't ask questions like that. No, ask those questions.
Oh yeah,
like,
definitely.
Don't shut it down.
Yeah, but I think the most or the least comforting response to that question of like, why does God allow bad things to happen is, oh well, God's not really in control. Like he can't really control what happens in your life. That is a sad view to have, because like you're saying that you're just kind of alone, and like all of these problems aren't really working towards anything, and you're just I feel like it's kind of a sad viewpoint.
Yeah, just thinking that he only interacts with you when he needs to.
Yeah.
And that only when he wants to, and it's like, it is sad because God he's there in the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most comforting thing you can hear is, no, God doesn't just abandon you. Even when you are thinking like, where's God? Why would God do this to me? How could God? And you're furious with God.
Yeah.
You're still mad at him.
Mm-hmm.
You're still close to him. You can't be mad at something that isn't there.
Yeah.
Like God he's always there, and he's always taking care of you. And I think a great, reminder of that, and a great chapter to kind of look at that idea of being in the worst place and still understanding that God is providing for you in some shape or form is Job. Like Job's whole chapter is one of my favorite because when I was going through hard times, I would remember like Job and how faithful he was.
Yeah.
Despite God giving all of the control to Satan to do whatever he wanted to Job. And I'm not sure if Job is a actual person.
Uh-huh.
I think if you read the chapter, it's pretty evident that it's more of a
sort of an illustration.
Yeah, an illustration.
Yeah.
I'd say the best. Because if you read the chapter, it starts off with like a view of heaven,
Yeah.
of God and Satan, and they're talking about Job, and he's like, "What about this Job man?" And
yeah,
I'm not sure who wrote it. And I don't want to speak for who wrote it.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that. This is another rabbit hole. I've heard that like viewpoint of it's not like an actual event that took place, but I don't know where I fall on that. To be honest with you.
Well, it's hard to say it was an actual event because who wrote down God's conversation?
Yeah.
Now, God breathed in it, and it is believed that in the church, when they established the canon, they believed that this was a book to be left in the Bible.
Yeah.
So the lessons in the Bible, that were the lessons of this chapter, and the way it showed God's glory and God as a character, and his character.
Yeah.
Not like a cartoon character, but like himself and who he is and how he is and his emotions and personality, his character, like a character of a man. It lined up with the Bible.
Yeah.
So they assumed that it was like, okay, this is an actual thing to be put in the canon.
Yeah, for sure.
But also, I don't think it's there's no way that someone heard God saying this conversation.
Yeah. Unless it was just, divinely revealed to them in some way. But which is a possibility.
Yeah. But it's a loose one.
Yeah.
It's hard to.
Well, I mean, but that's how all the prophets wrote all their, but
right.
Like they say, "Thus saith the Lord," and
So you think like whoever wrote Job was like, "Thus saith the Lord." Satan and God were in heaven, and Satan said, "Hey, yo, the homeboy Job down there, and it looks like he's living it up. Let me fuck him up, please." And God was like, "All right, brother, go for it."
Yeah.
You think that's I'm not saying it's again, we're talking about how great this chapter is.
Yeah.
But I do wonder how it came to be. I need to look into that. I'm sure there's
another episode.
Yeah. Where did Job come from?
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk about the canon in one of these episodes.
Yeah, definitely.
That's another thing that I'm trying to understand more before we go into it. Mm-hmm. But there's so many things.
Yeah.
That is the
R.C. Sproul actually has a good chapter on it in the Everyone's a Theologian book.
Yeah, I read it.
Oh yeah.
It left me with more questions.
Really?
Yeah, it was a good chapter, but I think there was one part in it where he writes like God is sovereign and he is in charge of everything.
Yeah.
And so we can trust the church and the decisions the church made were good because God is sovereign. He wouldn't allow it to be any different.
Yeah.
And like I don't disagree with that, but also there are things that churches do that God allows that aren't good.
Yeah.
If you look at all of the different churches that are mega churches with the drum lines hanging from the ceiling and during the Christmas, and you look at the Mormons who did change the Bible and they added to the Bible.
Yeah.
You take the Catholics who also changed the Bible and added to the Bible.
Yeah.
God allowed that to happen also. And so it's hard for me. And I need to I think I just need to look into the history of it more and how the church established that like canon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to be like transparent with that. Like I was like, that's not enough for me to be like okay with it.
Yeah.
And understand like this is what the Bible is and know fully.
Mm.
Not saying it isn't.
Yeah.
I do think God speaks through the Bible, and I do think that it's very evident when you're reading something that is breathed in with spiritual and you can hear God in that.
Yeah.
But also that kind of left me with like, okay, I get it, but also that is still not enough for me to be fully confident
for sure
in it. Like, not to say that the Bible doesn't provide great knowledge and is a beautiful book that I love to read, but I want to know historically how it came to our language, because I do believe in the Bible. I do believe in the Hebrew and the Greek, and I do believe that those scriptures originally were written and are the Bible.
Yeah.
But also the books in the Bible, sometimes the canon is a mystery to me. I need to look more into it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fair lesson for other Christians who are listening. Like, when you run into a question like that, something where you're like, okay, I don't know if that's fair. I think some Christians look at that and they turn around and they're like, well, time to find a new religion. It's like, no, look into it. Like, research it.
Yeah, for sure.
All of my hard questions I've found an answer for.
Yeah.
And it was based on me just actually putting my boots to the ground.
Just like, oh, well, I got a doubt. I guess I just give up, But like, you should like question your doubts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and like, okay, why am I having this doubt? And then assess it, and then research. Yeah, like figure it out.
Like, I'm not doubting this book. Like, I'm not saying I don't believe in this, but it's more so I want to know how God like did this. I want to know how he orchestrated this book to get to this point.
Yeah.
I want to see that. And I also want to ensure that the Bible that I'm reading, the version that I'm reading, isn't one that was affected by man. And I think that's fair. Yeah. I think it's very clear when it's been affected by man, but it's also, I think it's important for me at least to know
for sure.
The Bible that I'm reading is actually what God intended, not what man intended.
Yeah.
But
man, we dude.
So is God a multi?
Oh man,
yeah, we really did. But
it was good though.
That's kind of the point of these kind of sitting down and talking. It's not. There's a main point that we're trying to establish, and I think God and how he works in our dimension and trying to understand that and put it into our own words, I think is an important aspect of this episode. Is it's not necessarily are dimensions real or are they not real, but it's more so what do we think of this and where it goes. Like this show is not. I mean, if we have an atheist on and he wants to rant about some random subject, I would love to hear that, because I think a mindset of a person is incredibly important, and we all have a different idea of things.
Yeah.
And it's fun. Like, I think having a conversation about God and his character and who he is important.
For sure.
So, going back to the dimensional ideas, do you think that heaven and hell are different dimensions?
Yeah.
And also, we can kind of talk about this a little bit. Side note, like, hell isn't a word in the Bible.
Yeah.
It isn't the idea of, like, you're going to go to hell when you die. It is a Christian made idea.
Yeah.
The only description of hell we have is, I think, in Revelation is the closest thing. And it's the fiery pits, but even that is not referring to hell. It's referring to Satan's imprisonment.
I think that Jesus also talks about like hell, basically. Like
but he describes it. He never like, he basically talks about hell is separation from God.
Yeah.
And he mentions, like, when God is mad at you and when you turn away from him, you will go to eternal death.
Yeah.
And the only descriptions that have been made of hell in the Bible are basically, and I talked to Will about this too, like, it's dark and it's painful.
Yeah.
And it's separate from God. It's not like you're being tortured for life. I think a lot of that comes from the Catholics.
Yeah. And
also layers of hell.
Yeah, yeah. And like that, well, it originally came from that, which led to, like, like pop culture sort of references to it, of, like, you got this little goat man with, like, this red goat man with a pitchfork, and
it's definitely more culturally a Christian thing, and it's also, I think, a weapon that Christians use quite often, especially in the Bible Belt, that you're gonna go to hell. I've seen it during voting seasons, or when people are voting for abortion or not for abortion. Like, if you vote for pro-abortion, you're going to hell.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, relax.
Yeah, it's like, is that really the best way to, like,
so that's kind of a question. I do think there is a heaven that is very clear. That is what we've been given. I think God gave us information for what is important and what is needed to be known. It is very clear that we know that when we die, there is a heaven that we are going to, and Jesus will be seated at the right hand of God. And God will be in the throne. We'll be worshiping God and praising God. I grew up with the idea that, because my parents taught me this, that, like, we each had, like, a mansion that God made for us, and that Jesus built it by hand, or something like that, which is nowhere in the Bible, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think God is definitely going to give us a place to be.
Right.
But also, are we even going to sleep in heaven?
Yeah, I know. That's the question.
Are we going to need a place to stay?
Why would you need a mansion if you're not going to be sleeping?
Like, what are we just going to be like, all right, God, I'm going to go little people out today, God. I'm going to go home.
Yeah.
Like,
man,
I don't think that's going to happen.
All these saints are kind of driving me crazy. I'm going to... Just gonna go spend some me time.
I'm about to lose it on Paul. Okay, I gotta go, God. I'm gonna go play Tetris in my house.
Yeah.
That you built for me.
Games in heaven?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, you're right.
I also don't think we're going to need that. We're not gonna need rest. We're not gonna need to be peopled out because we're not gonna have the sinful want to be alone.
Yeah.
And to our own devices. Yeah. Now I'm not digging on anybody. I get peopled out all the time. Yeah. I hate that Trent's here right now.
Fine, I'll leave.
I want to go to bed. Anyways, that's the end of the episode, guys. I'll see you. No, I'm just kidding.
Next time on Cosmic for Science. I mean, Complexity.
That's next season. We'll do that. But heaven is very clearly, like, it's been described. We know it's something that we can, like, I can bet on that heaven is the place I'm going. So evidently clear, like, God and Jesus made it very clear. And I do think Jesus made like a punishment after death very clear, but hell itself as a word is not that punishment. It is a separate punishment. So infinitely being away from God and separate from God, and then heaven is infinitely being with God.
Yeah.
So infinitely in pain and darkness and whatever death is.
Yeah.
Because for us, as Christians, we believe when we die, our spirit is lifted up and it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
But when you die and you're not that, like, what happens?
Yeah.
And I do think it is a scary concept.
Yeah, no, it is. And I'm not saying that I agree with this because I really don't know, but there is a theory, like some people believe that instead of sending unbelievers to hell, their souls are just, like, God just eternally destroys their souls, like, and they just don't exist anymore, basically. Mm-hmm. I some people do believe that, but I don't know if I would subscribe to that. I still need to kind of research it some more.
I never heard that idea.
But no, I think that I don't know. I'm kind of lean more in the traditional way that, like, hell is a real place and heaven's a real place. Obviously, they're both, like, spiritual places.
Yeah.
But I think that, like you said, hell isn't going to be this, giant fiery pit with different layers of, like, how bad you were, or, like, and, it's not really ruled by, I mean, okay. This is going to sound crazy, but hell is ruled by God. You know what I mean? Like, Satan's not down there with the, on a throne, like, ruling hell. He's like, he's hell's first prisoner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, but like you said, I don't think it's like the kind of your typical, like, kind of pop culture description of it. I think it, like Jesus describes it as, like, there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and I basically, like you said, eternal death and, like, separation from God, and, like, it's just,
which I wouldn't even say ruled, because I think it's God intentionally puts you there when you die.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you die, and God says, "I do not know you. You are not my son. You are not my daughter," and he turns you away. He doesn't take you to heaven or whatever that looks like. Whatever that first initial when you die, where you go, who you talk to. There are this is like some loose theories, but the most that we can comprehend, that there are 3 different dimensions that we can go to when we die. There's a in-between space, which is the answer to, say, someone had a heart attack and they were dead for a minute.
Yeah.
And they came back to life. That's why they didn't go immediately to hell or immediately to heaven. They were in the in-between state, where their spirit wasn't being claimed by anybody. It was just there in that space. And I can't tell you right now who it was, but I do believe there is a certain person from the Old Testament that I can't remember his name, who he was cursed to walk the earth forever.
Was it Cain?
It might have been Cain, and the theory is that he is in that space.
Yeah.
Because his body is decayed and he's at a point where he is just in that realm of infinite in between. And there's no life or death to him. And then there's heaven, where you meet with God, you're there, and then there's where you are away from God.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think hell is necessarily like a place being ruled by Satan.
No,
I do think that there is a space. Like I'm not saying there isn't a place for people to go.
Right.
I think if you just say the spirits just get destroyed, I don't think God cares for the spirits that He's made, and even the angels and even Satan, when they turned against Him, He didn't destroy them and smite them. Like He put them against Him. They were against God, and He turned them away from Him. Where they don't see God, they don't interact with God, they don't have God, and I think that is what hell is. It's away from God. It is like without God.
Yeah.
So without God, your spirit is nothing. You don't feel anything but guilt and sadness and pain, and it's dark and you're alone. And I think that is the point of it. It's not. It's the understanding and realization of, oh, I was only wanting myself and what's good for me and what I want to do, and then you realize that after, and you are stuck in that torment. Forever, infinitely, and that is, I would argue, scarier than the idea of pop culture hell.
Yeah.
Because that is a level of pain that is far beyond just physical.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point of it. It's not, it is a thing to be feared, because you're realizing just how the little things that you wanted.
Yeah.
You wanted to jack off. You wanted to lust after this woman. You wanted to be major, like gluttony and eating everything, or bestiality, or murdering multiple people.
Yeah.
Like those are sins against God, and they were also sins that God was very clearly warning us about for our own good.
Yeah.
God doesn't want us to be in that space, but when we ignore God, we turn away from God, that's where we end up.
Yeah.
That's what I think. But I think it's very evident that there is a space like that, because Jesus is very clear about it. And that God does have a punishment for those who do that. Yeah. But
yeah, no, I agree with kind of your definitions of heaven and hell. I don't know about the in between. I just don't really know much about that.
I don't know much about it either, but
I'll have to do some more research on that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things where it's like, is it worth us knowing? Like, we need to know.
Yeah, I mean,
but when you think about it, it does make sense. There would be a space.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't have people like the fucking heaven is real kid. Oh my God.
Yeah, didn't that come out to be just like made up? Right?
Yes.
Like he made it up.
His parents made it up.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember I was like, dang, that's pretty crazy.
I remember seeing it and I was like, that's BS.
Yeah.
And I was like 10. I was like, he's lying.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way this kid died and went to heaven and was like, hey mom, hey dad, let's write a book and make a movie.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that kid was, I mean, he was already trying to capitalize off it, and he's only what?
Exactly. He was like 10.
Yeah.
I feel like if someone actually saw heaven, they wouldn't go and try to profit off of it. They'd be like, I need to share my experience with other Christians and with people who need to hear God's word.
Yeah.
Like, they wouldn't be going for their glory, they'd be going for God's glory.
Yeah.
And I think that was very evident in that case. Like, there's a guy who was a Satanist or atheist or something, and he was on a trip or something and saw Jesus's face.
Yeah.
And he saw Jesus, and he was actively against God, and he claims that like it was in some state he spiritually like connected with Jesus and met Jesus and realized that everything he had been saying and everything he believed was wrong, and like immediately changed and converted to like Christianity and like every time he tells the story, he cries.
Dang.
Like I believe that. I believe that happened. Like I do think like Jesus reveals himself to us
Yeah.
in different ways, and but that's not dying, you know.
Yeah, no, it's. But no, one thing I will say though, like I mean, and it's just kind of a little side note. Just to make sure that nothing that we said is like come across wrong. Like you know, if you're not familiar with like kind of Christian lingo or kind of the way we understand like these types of things, I just kind of wanted to clarify some of that. Like I feel like um well, I know that we are all um sinful by nature, and we're all deserving of God's punishment and wrath, and all deserving of hell. And it's not by any like good works or like good deeds that we do to make it into heaven. It's not like the good people go to heaven and the bad people go to hell.
Yeah.
We're all bad, right? And it's not based off of what anything good that we do, but it's all based off of Christ's, and what by Christ I mean like Jesus Christ's his life, which his life he earned righteousness, and he followed all of the law perfectly, which is something we can never do. And then his death, he took the penalty for our sins, like he took the punishment for it, which is death.
Yeah.
And so his life, his death, and then also by rising from the grave, he resurrected. He conquered sin and death forever. So whenever we put our faith in him, in Christ, we get his righteousness. His righteous life is ours. So whenever God sees us, he doesn't see our sin. He only sees Christ's righteousness.
Yeah.
And then we no longer have to suffer the punishment for our sins, because Christ completely, drained every last drop of God's wrath on the cross. So we don't have to take any punishment for it. And then 3, we can live confidently knowing that we serve a risen Savior and a risen King. You know, he's not dead. He's alive, and we, like, I mean, we have a living hope, which is Christ. So just to clarify, I don't want anybody to think that we're like oh, like all the you have to do all these good works to go to heaven, because that's not the case. Like,
no,
we can't be saved by good works. So
yeah, and the Bible makes it very clear that the 10 Commandments and the way that God initially explained to us how to live, they're not like, if you don't do this perfectly, you're gonna go to hell. Like, and I think that's a very major misunderstanding of Christianity. And I talked about this in my sin episode, in episode 2. And if you want to look more into sin and what I think of that alone, Trent wasn't on the episode. I do go through that, and I do try to explain the best I can of what sin is and what sin is intended to be. But we don't walk around thinking you're going to hell, you're not going to hell, and if you don't live this way, you're going to hell. That's an awful way to look at people, and I would never do that.
For sure.
And I have experienced that firsthand. People who look at me and say, you're going to hell because you do this, because you say this word. I have YouTube video comments where people say that. And I'm sure when these episodes come out, I don't know what kind of interaction we'll get.
Yeah.
I genuinely have no idea.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
But I will say, we are not saying this is a fact for everybody. And we do believe this, but that doesn't mean that you have to. We're not forcing anybody to believe that. But do open your ears and do listen to our ideas and our concepts, and we believe them for a reason. And I do think, like, if you're listening and you're an atheist and it offends you if we say we think these people are going to hell, just understand when we say that, that's based on what we believe, not what you believe. Now, if you want to look into what we believe and kind of try to understand that, I would highly encourage that. But it is good to keep that in mind, that when we talk about these things, it's based on what we believe, and we're simply just having that conversation because we want to. It's not. We're not here to. This isn't convert everyone who listens to Christianity the podcast.
Yeah.
No, it's cosmic croissants. Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of dudes, talking about
Multi-dimensional beings and wherever else this episode derailed to.
Yeah.
But yeah, just we do love people, and we don't just look at everyone and think they're going to hell. And I think that is Jesus didn't do that either. Jesus was very clear, and he chose to be with those who were sinful, because Jesus understood that no one was without sin but him. And he made it very clear to everyone that he was without sin and that no one else is. To the Pharisees, who, they believed that they were perfect and they were waiting for their God to return.
Yep.
They didn't believe that Jesus was him because Jesus loved the people who were sinful, and they couldn't comprehend that. And I think that the Pharisees are very similar to a lot of modern churches now.
Yeah. Self-righteous.
Are very self-righteous, and they think, how could a Christian love someone who is sinful? And it's like, well, believe it or not.
Yeah. The most perfect human in all of history loves sinners. So
yeah, and he made it a point to go out of his way. I mean, even at birth, Jesus made it a point of loving those and glorifying those through God, through Christ, despite their sin.
Yeah.
I mean, Mary, when she told them that she was with a child and a virgin and unmarried, that would have, that is a basic suicide of your person, of your reputation, of who you are.
Yep.
In that culture at that time, potentially to be killed. She could have been killed for that. And she still chose to tell them and share that and be like, I was told not to be afraid. I swear, no one's done the hanky panky with me. I am of a child. And I think that is very evident too, the cultural understanding of Jesus, even at birth. Jesus showed that he loves those who are full of sin, and he deeply cares for those. You have the woman at the well, or the woman who, she was bleeding and she couldn't stop bleeding. She'd been bleeding her whole life. If just for her to touch him, was that Jesus was a prime example of love and caring for the sinful. And if you're a Christian and you look at someone who is sinful with disgust, you're not living a Christian life, and you're not someone who I would love to talk to.
No.
But on this episode or on this show,
hey, but we still love you.
Yeah, exactly. And I do love hearing different Christians' aspects and ideas, and I am excited to eventually start getting guests on the show.
Yeah.
I do think we need to kind of get a little more used to the roundabout of it, and I think this is our second episode together, but I think once we get to that point where we can kind of start learning how to interact with each other, I think then we can start adding guests on. But I do want to make it clear, when we talk about these things, we're not simply just saying this to convince anybody. We're just sharing. In the same way, when we have an atheist on, he can share or she can share whatever they want to, or a Mormon, or a Lutheran, or agnostic, or a flat earther, or that is the point of the show, is simply to share that. So if you're listening to this and you're slightly offended, just know that that is not the point of this episode at all. And it was more so just, what do these two Christians think about multidimensional worlds? And now we're at a completely different end. Yeah. Than the start of the conversation.
We made it back around though. We kind of went in a big weird circle.
Yeah, it was like an infinity 8. But I think to end it, I don't think multidimensionals are a thing. I don't think we.
I mean, I think that. Well, okay, if we're talking dimensions, as in I
think heaven and hell are dimensions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're talking dimensions, as in one dimensional would be just a line, on a graph, or like, and 2-dimensional would be like a square. 3 would be, you know, the reality we exist in.
Mm.
I think that it's a possibility that more of those types of dimensions could exist, like interstellar type stuff.
Yeah.
Like multiple dimensions, like 4, 5, 6 other dimensions. But I don't think that other like realities or worlds
Yeah.
exist. I mean, of course, other than like a spiritual world, but I mean,
So our answer is yes, but no.
yeah.
Maybe,
But no, like multiverses. I don't think.
unless maybe we should probably get someone who has a better understanding of this.
Probably.
We'll look into that.
Yeah.
I joined a bunch of Reddits, and I'm gonna start sending out messages here pretty soon where I'm like, hey, if you're interested, email this, and then we can kind of start to go through some people.
Yeah.
And see if we can get some guests on the show, because there's no certification for this. I do think that if I meet somebody and I like what they think and I want to hear them talk about it, I think it's perfectly fine to have them on the show, and I would like to. So we're working on it. There's definitely a lot of steps it takes to it, and also a lot of boldness. It's intimidating for me to be like able to convince someone to come on the show when there's no proof of how it will do.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea. Every time we sit down to record, it's fun, but it's also kind of terrifying. So, but with that, thank you guys for sitting down, driving, working, studying, or whatever you're doing, and helping us ponder the ideas and understand the complexity of the universe. And I hope to see you again, or hear you again, or smell you again. So, with that, Trent, do you have anything you want to say?
I don't think so. I think
right.
we got it all.
With that, thank you guys so much for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and comment. I would love to hear what y'all think as well. So, with that, adios and have a good one. Trent, say goodbye to you. You gotta say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.